Welcome to the Faith and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Elle Edwards, mental health champion, happiness geek, and founder of the Faith and Business Playground. Join me each week as I talk openly about mental health, the dark side of entrepreneurism, and bring you Bible-friendly tools, support, and resources to help bring more joy to your journey. Episode of the podcast, we are thinking about Elijah, the suicidal prophet, as we're going to call him, for reasons that will become obvious in a minute. And we're thinking about what he can teach us about those days when things are feeling a little bit difficult. And yes, I have to be quite honest here. This is something that I shared in church maybe 3 weeks ago. We were talking about mental health and using Elijah as an example. So this is a topic which I have already talked about in that context. And if you're listening and you actually go to my church, then sorry, you maybe want to listen to a different episode because you've heard lots of this before. But it's really important to me that we as people of faith do a better job of supporting each other. You know, I've told you before about my friend who got kicked from a Bible study group because she talked about the fact that she's bipolar. That's not good enough. We have to do better at looking after our own, which is why I introduced this topic, or didn't introduce it for the first time. It's something we've talked about before in church, but reminding people, because I love to smile. I love having happy days, but that's not to say that every single day is amazing. There are days when I'm a bit like, some of that maybe tiredness. For example, I've noticed if I have a day that's really full on, I give the example of recording the podcast actually, but that's not a good example because at the moment I only record, a couple of hours and then I have a break for another day. But back before Christmas, when I was batch recording multiple podcast episodes and multiple episodes of the Mindset Minute, there was a lot of speaking. And as much as I love talking, it's quite draining. And so I noticed on the day after I had a heavy day of recording, I would find myself feeling quite, and almost flat. And it wasn't until I started to recognize, okay, maybe this is tiredness and started to be kinder to myself and didn't give myself a hard time and try and power through, because that doesn't help anybody. I started to appreciate, the ebbs and flows of our energy. So even if you're somebody whose default happiness level or whose default positivity level is quite high, and incidentally, if you find that your positivity level isn't particularly high and you want some help boosting it, there's a podcast episode last week that will be really helpful to you. I'd go back, I want to say it's episode number 104 or 105. Go to faithandbusinessplayground.com/FAB105, I believe it is, or 106. But if I can find my notes while I'm talking, I will find it and I'll tell you for definite. Because there are things that you can do to help raise your positivity level, your default level. And the advantage of raising your default level is if you have a day that's a bit it doesn't push you down so far. And so that's why I do encourage you. I want you to be honest about day-to-day life and to feel the feels, but I'm also here to encourage you to do what you can to increase those happiness levels so that if you have a day that's less than stellar, it doesn't push you down so far. But that was last week. What we're really thinking about today, or what I want to learn today from Elijah, is what do we do? What does God say we should do on those days when it all feels too much? Now, some context for you. I'm not going to read it all to you now, but if you want to read it, this is coming from 1 Kings 17, 18, and 19. So background context: Elijah, at this point in his story, his depressive episode, for want of a better label, his day when he's not feeling brilliant, comes after a day of some times of great triumph. He'd had the rain had stopped, and there was no food to be had, and yet he'd been fed by ravens. There's also the bit where the widow had no oil left, and he lived with her and her son, and the jar of oil never ran out. And then the son died and he brought him back to life. So Elijah was riding high, for want of a better expression. He was doing really well. He was having a great time. Things were looking good. And yet, all of a sudden, as a result of one threat from one scary queen, he sunk down to the lowest point in his story, as is recorded in Kings at least. if you've heard the story of the prophets of Baal, there was 450 of them. He was taunting them, and he really showed how powerful God is. It was a really great moment. And like I say, Queen Jezebel said, basically said, you're going to be dead today, mate. If it's the last thing I possibly do, this is it for you. You're scuppers. And because of that threat, it sent Elijah over the edge. He went out into the wilderness and he isolated himself. And this ties in what we've talked about in the Mindset Minute this week. We get this story in our head sometimes that it's just us. When you're having a difficult day, particularly if you go on social media and you see everybody around you looking really happy and content and everything's wonderful, and then you compare how you're feeling to that, you're left with the impression it's just you. And as I will remind you in the Mindset Minute this week, it is not just you. And so when you want to isolate yourself, know that you are not the first person to do that. I would also encourage you not to isolate yourself. The very, very best thing you can do is to reach out to somebody. We'll get onto that in a moment. And also the antidote to when you can't reach out, because I know if you're too far down the hole, it can be difficult. But Elijah really thought it was just him. He took himself off into the desert. He said to God, that's it. There's nobody else here. I'm the only one left. And now I'm going to be dead as well. I'm paraphrasing, but that is the gist of what he was saying. God's answer to that a little bit later in the story is to remind him, actually, it's not just you. And he went on to mention the 1,000 other people that were still loving God at the time. And he also instructed Elijah to find Elijah's replacement, Elisha. Why those names are so similar, I don't know. But God reminded him, actually, mate, it isn't just you. And so I want to remind you today that God is saying to you, even if your brain is telling you, it's just me, I'm the only one doing this, I'm all on my own, that's your brain giving you a hard time. It happens to the best of us. It happened to Elijah. This is probably not the first time it's happened to you. It's happened to me too. But I'm here to remind you today that you are not alone, and it's not just you. Those feelings that you get, part of the nature of being in that place is that we get these whispers that we can't possibly talk about it because it's really only just us. And if we admit out loud how we're feeling, complete disaster will happen. No, we are here to offer love to each other. Like I said at the start of this episode, we've got to do better. We've got to do a better job of loving on each other. And so I would encourage you and remind you that it really is not just you. So Elijah in his story in 1 Kings 19 is told to get up and eat. The angel rocks up, angel of the Lord appears and says, Elijah, get up and eat. So he's encouraged to get up. But just like how Elijah had an angel to help him get up. And I don't think it's a coincidence. It wasn't like God whispered into Elijah's ear, get up and eat. God sent Elijah an angel. And I don't know, there's some speculation. You know, when you read the Old Testament and it talks about an angel of the Lord. It happened in Daniel as well. There's some speculation that might have been Jesus in like being born to Mary times. I don't know. But whoever or whatever this being was that appeared to Elijah, I don't think it's accidental that God is saying to Elijah and sending someone to help him up. And so, yes, we are encouraged to get up. It is good to feel the feelings and then get back up again. But I feel God is reminding us in this story with Elijah that sometimes we need a little bit of help. Now, this works both ways. And this is something we talked about a couple of weeks ago in the episode entitled What to Do When It's Not Okay. Again, I'm not actually listing that correctly. But there was if you listen along every week, we did have an episode where we talked about those days when it's not okay. And the answer was twofold. So the answer was, if you're having a day that's not great, if possible, reach out. And if you're not too far down the hole, if you've got a support community around you, if you're a member of the Faith and Business Playground already, come on over to us. Never be afraid of reaching out and speaking up and asking for help. That's one of the very best things you can do. However, the flip of this, of course, is that sometimes it's really hard to reach out. And so the onus then is on us, if you're having a good day, to be that angel. And we did talk about this before, but I'm mentioning it again specifically because we are given this illustration through Elijah's story. God sent an angel, and you can be that angel for somebody else. Like I talked about in the Mindset Minute, you can be that angel for somebody else. Now, what does that look like in day-to-day life? It's about keeping your eyes and your ears open. It's about knowing our friends and the people that we care about. If someone's quieter than normal, if you suddenly, I haven't seen so-and-so for a little while, reaching out, are you okay? How are you doing? I'd also encourage you to ask, how are you? And if they come, yeah, fine. How are you really? Because, as I've said before, how are you is a question. It's not a greeting. But there is that danger. Sometimes, more often than not, it becomes a greeting. So how are you? How are you really? And you don't just do this to random strangers on the street. Most of the time, that's not, I don't think I've ever been asked to inquire after the mental state or otherwise of some random stranger. This is about friendships. This is about relationships. We are people who are born to be in community. And so I would encourage you, if you're having a good day, or, if you're having a day where you're not feeling and down the hole yourself, keep your eyes and ears open and see if you can be that angel for somebody else, because we have that vital role. There are people who I am called to love on, and there are people who you are called to love on. And yes, sometimes our circles will overlap. God, I don't believe that God relies on one person to love on one person. He's got to have backup plans, That's why it's powerful being in community. So we can look out for each other. But you can be that angel for another person. And you are encouraged, I believe, through the story of Elijah, that reminder, you are encouraged to be that angel for somebody else. The other thing that I love about the Elijah story is that God doesn't leave it there. God doesn't say, okay, you've had a rough day. There we are. Never mind. Pat on the head and carried on. The first thing the angel does is gives him nourishment. He gives him food, and then Elijah goes back to sleep for a bit, and then the angel wakes him up again, gives him some more food. And so there's that reminder as well of, we don't have to just rush through this healing process. There is need for nourishment. There is need for rest. There's need for recuperation. That's fine. I will put my hand up to the fact that I quite like to hurry through that process of feeling the feelings. I would rather get that bit over and done with and get back to being and doing and moving forward again. I find it really uncomfortable and hard to sit in those feelings for too long. But it's important that we do. And we are reminded of that in this story. But having felt those feelings and having got the nourishment and the rest that he needed, Elijah was then sent on a journey. He walked for 40 days, and then God spoke to him, and he reminded him that you're not alone. Here's what I want you to do next. God had a purpose for Elijah, and God's got a purpose for you too. I like to often say, if you're having a good day, enjoy it, because this too will pass. And if you're having a bad day, I know this too will pass. It works both ways. But whether you're having a good day or a bad day, you are made in God's image for a purpose. God has a purpose and a plan, and he knew it way back when. And it's hard to believe that on the days when things are feeling, you just want to curl up in a ball and watch reruns of Doctor Who or Call the Midwife or whatever particular series you're binge watching at the moment. And you just want to shut out the world. And that's fine. You've got to feel those feelings, but then get back up again with that nourishment, because God does have a purpose for you. God does have a plan. And the other last reminder that we get from that story is when God actually came to Elijah, he said, he sent, I haven't got it open in front of me, but he sent a hurricane or it was a fire first. He sent a fire, and God wasn't in the fire. And he sent an earthquake or a hurricane, I can't remember which, and God wasn't in that either. He sent a really strong, blustery, noisy wind, and God wasn't in that either. God was in the whisper. And that was exactly what Elijah needed at that moment in time. And God knows what you need at this moment in time too. And I believe he's reminding us today that he will send what you need for such a time as this. He will send you what you need today. And sometimes we need a kick up the behind. We need to, come on, up you get. But other times we need that gentle whisper. And whatever you need, God can provide that. And he shows us that really clearly through Elijah's story. So I do just want to encourage you, if today is a day that's feeling difficult, take some encouragement from Elijah's story. And if today's feeling great, wonderful, enjoy it. It will pass. But if you're having a good day, remember you can be that angel for somebody else. And I would encourage you to keep your eyes open for those opportunities to be so. And as ever, of course, if you're not already a member of the Faith and Business Playground, I would love for you to come and join us. It's a small community of Jesus Geeks. We are talking mental health. We're talking happiness. We're talking, goal setting as well. It's faith and business all mixed together to help you have a more delightful day-to-day life. But, open conversation, being honest about where things really are at. If that sounds like something that would be a benefit to you, I would encourage you to join us. Go to faithandbusinessplayground.com/join. You can find out more, and if it feels like a good fit, you can come and join us. In the meantime, thank you for listening. If you're not already subscribed, please do subscribe. If you enjoy these episodes, consider leaving a review because it helps other people find the podcast as well. I look forward to catching up with you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.